Hello, welcome to this week's Bible reading and reflections. I'm Hilary, I'm the rector of Wyoming Anglican Church. This week's reading is from Genesis chapter 32, and I'm starting at verse 22. The same night, Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 maids, and his 11 children, and crossed the ford of the Jackal. He took them and sent them across the stream, and likewise everything that he had. Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. When the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob, he struck him on the hip socket, and Jacob's hip was put out of joint as he wrestled with him. Then he said, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." But Jacob said, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." So he said to him, "What is your name?" And he said, "Jacob." Then the man said, "You shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have striven with God and with humans, and have prevailed." Then Jacob asked him, "Please tell me your name." But he said, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "For I have seen God face to face, and yet my life is preserved." The sun rose upon him as he passed Peniel, limping because of his hip. What an extraordinary passage. What are we to make of it? What might God be wanting to say to us through it? Does it teach us anything about God? Does it teach us anything about our walk with God? There is a dreamlike quality to this wrestling match that Jacob has through the night. There is mystery about this man who wrestles with Jacob. There are some fragments of conversation and actions that don't flow smoothly one after the other, as so often happens in our dreams. Yet Jacob's encounter with this man are not described as being in a dream. In the morning, Jacob thinks he's had an encounter with God. He calls the place where he's been Peniel, meaning the face of God, because Jacob says, "I saw God face to face." This is Jacob's situation. He is stressed. He has fallen out with his twin brother Esau. They are bitter enemies. Jacob has taken Esau's birthright and blessing by trickery, and Esau has threatened to kill Jacob. Years have passed without them having anything to do with each other. Jacob is now wanting to reconcile with his brother, and he receives a report that Esau is on his way to meet Jacob with 400 men. We read that Jacob was in great fear and distress. He is expecting Esau to attack. So Jacob divides all the people in his camp and his flocks into 2 groups, so that if Esau attacks one group, the other should be able to escape. And he does something that it would appear he hasn't done for many years, and what many people do when facing a crisis. He prays. And this is his prayer. "O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, O Lord, who said to me, 'Return to your country and to your kindred, and I will do you good.' I am not worthy of the least of all the steadfast love and all the faithfulness that you have shown to your servant. For with only my staff I crossed this Jordan, and now I have become 2 companies. Deliver me, please, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I am afraid of him. He may come and kill us all, the mothers with the children. Yet you have said, I will surely do you good and make your offspring as the sand of the sea, which cannot be counted because of their number." After praying, Jacob sends ahead some of his servants with gifts, many animals from his herds and flocks, to meet with Esau, hoping to pacify him. They are told what to say to Esau in order to diffuse his brother's anger against him. That night he sends his family and possessions on, and he is left alone. I don't often remember my dreams, but the ones I do are usually a weird jumble of people and places that I've been thinking about or have encountered during the day. For Jacob, this situation with Esau is clearly going to be dominating his thoughts, but also the God to whom he has just prayed, the God whom he doesn't really know. He calls God the God of his father Abraham, who's actually his grandfather, and his father Isaac. He's not his God at this point. What can God do? Will he intervene? Will he keep his word? These are thoughts that must have been going round Jacob's mind. It seems like Jacob's conflict with Esau and his dealings with God seem to be rolled into one in this wrestling match. A man wrestled with him, we are told. At times, this man has the attributes of someone who could be Esau, his twin brother. Jacob and this man are fairly evenly matched in the night-long fight. So we heard the man saw that he did not prevail against Jacob. And the man had to ask Jacob to let him go. He says, "Let me go, for the day is breaking." It seems he cannot break free of his own accord. But this man also has the attributes of God. With a touch, he dislocates his hip. The translation I read from, the NRSV, has the man striking Jacob's hip. That suggests a bit more force than a touch. There's about a 50-50 split on how the different Bible translations translate this particular Hebrew word. He struck him on the hip joint, or he touched him on the hip joint. So despite the fact that the man could not prevail over Jacob, it seems that he does have far more power than he's using in the wrestling match if he's able to dislocate Jacob's hip. And don't we imagine God having that sort of strength and power? In the Gospels, we read many times that Jesus, the Son of God, touched people. There was power in his touch too. His touch brought about healing, physical, mental, and spiritual healing. And Jacob recognizes this man as the one who can bless him and whose blessing is worth fighting for. "I will not let go unless you bless me," he says to this person. God is the one who blesses us. Others can pronounce God's blessings over us, but God is the source of all our blessing. Jacob realizes his need of God's blessing. So he hangs on until he receives that blessing from God. How important is it to us that we receive a blessing from God? God doesn't bless Jacob straight away. He withholds his blessing until the end of the encounter. Jacob may have demanded the blessing, but it is God who decides when he will give that blessing. This man also gives Jacob a new identity. Again, something that only God can do. He renames him Israel. In the New Testament, we are reminded of the new identity that God gives to his people. We become children of God. We are a new creation. We are no longer slaves to sin. We cannot reform ourselves. It is God who gives us a new identity. His previous name, Jacob, meant he takes by the heel, reminding us of his birth when he grabbed his older twin brother's heel. It could also mean he supplants, reminding us of him supplanting his older brother, whom by custom and tradition should have had the birthright and inheritance. That is now Jacob's. Jacob's new name is Israel. The meaning of the word Israel is disputed. It could mean the one who strives with God, or God strives. The man tells him that he is renaming Jacob Israel for a reason. For you have striven with God and with humans. That is what has defined him and will continue to define him and his descendants. After him, the whole people, all his descendants, are named Israelites. The name that God has given to Jacob and them reflects the relationship that God has with them. It's not an easy relationship. Many times God's people turn away from him. There is pain and struggle on both sides. We read about that in the Old Testament. Perhaps our walk with God involves struggle. Perhaps God struggles with us. Perhaps we grieve God at times. Perhaps he longs for us to return to him, as he did with his people in the Old Testament after we wander away. Perhaps we struggle to go God's way rather than our own. The final attribute of God we see in this man is that he chooses to remain hidden. Jacob asks him, "Please tell me your name." The man doesn't tell Jacob his name. He says, "Why is it that you ask my name?" And there he blessed him. God chooses the time when and to whom he reveals his identity. God is God. He later on reveals his identity to Moses. "I am who I am, Yahweh." He reveals his identity through a burning bush. Our prayer may be, "Show yourself to me, God," or "Speak to me." God doesn't remain hidden forever. He doesn't remain silent forever. Yet he reveals himself and speaks to us at a time of his choosing, not ours. After Jacob receives God's blessing, the encounter, the dream, the trance ends. Jacob is a changed person. He sees the whole episode as a face-to-face encounter with God, and he's amazed that he's still alive. But he is changed by this encounter. He now has God's blessing. He has a new name, Israel, though he's still called Jacob in the stories that follow. And he now has a limp. It's been a bruising encounter. In this mysterious man, we see something of God's nature, the power of his touch, the one from whom blessings come, the one who gives us a new identity, the one who chooses when and where to reveal himself to us. The passage also throws some light on our relationship with God. I see the wrestling match as a picture of our Christian lives. We're constantly wrestling with others, with ourselves, with God as we try to live out our faith. There is grappling within us between trusting God and fear of our circumstances, between God's call to forgive and our desire to hold on to hurt, between God's call to step out in faith and our desire to keep to the familiar. We, like Jacob, have the power to not let God prevail in our lives. We can choose fear and hatred and safety over trust, forgiveness, and faith. And God, in his love and grace and mercy, chooses not to overwhelm us. We can push God away, but does he ever want that? Does he ever say to us, as the man said to Jacob, "Let me go"? I don't think so. Instead, he says to us, "Come, come to me." God's promise to us is that he will never let us go. Jacob clung onto the man in the context of a wrestling match and then refused to let go until he received a blessing. In our faith journeys, we cling on to God for other reasons, perhaps for strength, for protection, for comfort in times of trouble. We cling on to God in the context of wrestling with our faith. And to those of us who are looking for God's blessing, he will not withhold it from us for long. And there God blessed Jacob, we heard in the reading. Where, I wonder, will that place of God's blessing be for us? Perhaps it's where you are now. Amen.